So we are here talking about startup funding. Basically the run of show here. We're going to have some introductions and welcome, which we kind of just did. Told you a little bit about the Founder Institute. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers, and they'll be able to tell you a little bit more about themselves. And we'll get into some moderator questions. And then finally, we'll close with some audience Q&A. So as Pete and myself both mentioned, either now, if you have questions prepared ahead of time, or as we get the conversation going, just feel free to add those questions into the chat there. And then we will be getting to them either at the end or throughout, if it makes more sense to do it that way. And then at the end of this event, might cut it a little bit shorter if we make it through, and then go right to the after event networking on AirMeet. So, we'll see about that. Yeah, talked a little bit about Founder Institute already. We're in 180 cities, have over 14,000 mentors, have had 4,000 companies that have made it through, and over $20 billion in value. And, really myself, I've seen this, a lot of the times the reasons that startups fail is because of a lack of, feedback and, people that can tell them, hey, learn from my experience. Here's what you really need to be doing. Here's what you shouldn't be doing. And, there's only so many hours in a day. So how can you make the biggest impact with the time that you have? And really, that's what our program is founded around, is really getting to focus, getting to things that are critical for your success, and getting to traction, funding, or whatever it is the next step is for your company. So really having access to the whole global Founder Institute network, and also through our proven methodology is really the formula to success that we found. And myself and Pete are going to be really excited to work with all of you. These are our speakers for the day. I'll just briefly go around and say a few words about each of them in no particular order. But I'll start with Andy. So Andy Van Baler, he is someone who folks local to the Santa Cruz community may know. He's got a lot of different initiatives that he's been working on, mainly on the funding side, but also now is working on his own startup. So they're still being stealthy, but now he's kind of getting a sense of what the other side of the coin is like when you're actually looking to raise capital. David Chung, he's the Regional Vice President of Sales at Vernetics. And that's actually the company that works on and builds the Gabriel Collection Suite, which is what Pete and Don and myself use for Blacksite. And Pete and Don can tell you a little bit more about what Blacksite is, but they work really closely with Vernetics, and I'm excited to have David here. He's also been on the angel investment side of things and has some pretty interesting stories I'm looking forward to hearing about. Jonathan Liu, someone who I know from the Singularity days. He has been in the investment world for quite some time, and runs an equity firm, as well as getting into other interesting ways that he works with startups. He was one of really the most instrumental mentors at the Singularity University Accelerator program, and really excited to have him be a part of this and be working with him again. Don Samoil, like I mentioned, is the COO at Blacksite Solutions, works closely with Pete. And yeah, really excited to hear more experience from some of the entrepreneurs and founders side of things when it comes to investing. Don's LinkedIn is notably sparse, so I'm really curious to know what he's been working on before Blacksite, depending on what he can actually talk about. Mikhail Holst, he is someone I worked really closely at Singularity. He was the portfolio manager for all of the portfolio companies that we had at Singularity. And now he's working with Citrus Foundry as their innovation and entrepreneurship manager. It's been a while since we've had a chance to reconnect, so excited to hear about how that's going. But after his 7 years at SU, I mean, he's one of the most knowledgeable and seasoned folks I've had the pleasure of working with. So really excited to have him aboard as well. And last, but certainly not least, John Baer was one of the folks that we love to bring in to Singularity to really talk straight to the founders and knock some sense into them. And I just love John's kind of no nonsense approach, telling it like it is. He's been in the VC business for years. Ventures, which was formerly called Threshold, for 20 years, which is crazy. Off of it, really excited to have his. So, what I'll do now is remove myself from the spotlight here and kill this presentation because we're basically going towards the moderator Q&A. And I'll start by just asking each of our speakers to go ahead and say a little bit about themselves. We can kick off with that. Now, Andy, would you like to start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, let me get off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Super. So I have actually been an entrepreneur for over 30 years. I've done many startups, but I think for this group, the most important thing is I was a co-founder of an angels group here in Santa Cruz. It started back in 2015. And in the process, I've mentored many different entrepreneurs. At the angel group, I was responsible for sourcing and due diligence to do all the presentations at our events. So I also personally invest. And I'm also part of many different organizations that hear pitches like Plug and Play, Keiretsu Forum, and those kinds of places. So I'm here to support the group here and help them really understand how to raise money.
Sweet, thank you.
Fantastic. Mikhail, would you like to say a few words next?
Yeah, certainly. So Mikhail Holst, I'm an Innovation Entrepreneurship Manager at Citrus Foundry. Citrus is one of 4 integrated science institutes at the state of California. And Citrus Foundry is an early stage startup incubator for deep tech startups at the University of California. Within that, about 80% of my time goes towards working on our incubator. Another 20% I work on some data projects. And, you know, that's probably actually good for now. I'll leave it there.
Short and sweet. All right. So I'm just moving across who I see coming up next on the top bar there. John Bear, since we have 2 Johns, would you like to go next and say a few words?
John Bear, Stone Earth Ventures. I'm a recovering venture capitalist and serial entrepreneur. The value I bring is I'm a generalist. I've been on all sides of the startup and financing world. Since dropping out of the venture business, I work with entrepreneurs and startups all over the world. I teach entrepreneurs to say less, and actually have had some success helping people raise capital. The most notable recent example was a company that I spent 3 months helping them get their story straight late last year, and they recently closed on a $25 million Series A financing.
Wow.
At a breathtaking valuation.
Wow, that's quite the success story. Congratulations on that.
Well, I also work with a little IoT company that's struggling to raise capital. So I want to give people a realistic sense that, you know, it's not always easy.
Exactly, and definitely looking to get into some of those stories that are not successful to really be able to learn from those. Thanks for sharing that. Jonathan Liu, our other John, would you like to say a few words now?
Yeah, hi everybody. I run a private equity group called Transformation Equity Partners, where as opposed to most of the early stage investing, I professionally look much more for later stage businesses that effectively have failed from what we in Silicon Valley call dying of indigestion rather than starvation. I got into this from having been a founder myself, then going down the route of becoming an investor/operator, and stay fairly involved within the early stage ecosystem, both as a privately as an angel investor, as well as in advisor, but more so as a way to help stay connected with the ecosystem, since most of what I look at is much more later stage, around Series C or beyond. And certainly wouldn't say that I've seen it all, but as a result of a lot of the deals that I do look at professionally through institutional investing, I've seen a lot of what goes wrong. So I'd say what I would focus a lot more on is less around helping you raise money and much more around helping you actually determine the right product market fit before you raise money. I certainly find far too often that founders spend 90% of the time worrying about capital, where they should be spending 90% of the time worrying about their product.
Good. Totally agree. And that is exactly why I'm so excited to have you. Next, David, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I'm going to try to copy what I've just heard and not say that much. I'm a regional vice president who supports our partner initiatives for Vernetics. We developed technologies from the intelligence community years ago, and based on the current events, we're currently in stealth mode to bring forth a whole new line of products and services. But I have to tell you, I wish there was a Founders Institute that existed when I started. It would have frankly saved me time, stress, and a lot of money. And you know, my focus has always been on early stage startups. So I did more angel investing early on with a primary focus on emerging technology. So just the opposite of where Jonathan is. And I probably would have been smart to listen to a guy like Jonathan and see, you know, a couple rodeos, if you will. But I really think that an opportunity like this is an ideal way, because if you've never done this before, you're going to be able to really pay attention to the folks that are speaking here today that have what you want. And I'm not talking about any successes under their belt, but in terms of how they look at the marketplace and really feel that they have a unique solution that fits a very specific problem. So I'm excited by this event. Can't thank you folks enough. Look forward to the opportunity.
We're excited to have you as well, David. Don, would you like to close us out? Say a few words about yourself?
Sure, glad to. Unfortunately, as the last one, I'm going to be a little bit redundant because we've got a terrific cast of guys, and you know, I have to agree that, you know, just listening to you people, you know, if this had been around when I was first starting out, I mean, one of the, I guess, as you're looking at, you know, this whole crazy universe of funding, you know, one thing to I guess keep in mind is that it's almost like a road with a ton of potholes, and just, you know, being able to avoid the potholes and tapping into the knowledge from, you know, people like this, you know, tremendous cast here is going to help you avoid 80% of them right off the bat. So, you know, by all means, if I have any word of advice, it is, you know, put your ego aside, open your ears, close your mouth, and listen to these people, and you will avoid the potholes. And just getting, you know, from A to B, half the battle is not making the mistakes that we've all very painfully, you know, gotten through. So, you know, that's, you know, basically my background. I've hit all these potholes, you know, raising through angels and VCs and IPOs and every which way with, you know, various startups over the last 25 years, and happy to share and help you guys avoid the potholes.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Don. All right. So I think we should do this kind of gallery view, which I'm hoping is how everyone's seeing this now. But yeah, I'd love to continue on and really get into some of the questions that I had about investing. And for those in the audience, you know, please feel free to use the chat there to drop any questions or things you wanted to talk about. And we will be getting to those either towards the end or sprinkling them in throughout. Looks like Jonathan Liu is on the move, but we will keep things going here. So first and foremost, I wanted to start off with this question. What are some of the fallacies around raising capital? Let's go ahead and become mythbusters. So whoever wants to jump in start talking about you know, false beliefs, things that are just not true at all. All right, I'll call on you.
I'll throw something in if you'd like.
Sounds good.
Okay, I mean, a couple of things. First, you know, the assumption is it's easy to raise money. It's not. It's damn hard. Number two, the assumption is that you raise money when you need money. And that's also a false assumption. You need to raise money when you don't need money. Number three, the assumption that the only way you can be successful is if you raise capital, and particularly you raise capital from venture capitalists, and that turns out not to be true either. So those are my top three.
Love it. And I saw Mikhail, a little nod from you there. Sounds like you agreed with one of those.
Yeah, I think John's right on every note, but you know, the point that resonated with me is that there is, particularly in the Bay Area, there's the assumption that to raise money, it's not even a question. You go to venture capitalists, maybe go to angels, and that's where all the money is. And there is a lot of money there, but there is still, and a lot of people are surprised to learn this, there is more money in this world tied up in foundations and impact investing than venture capital. And a lot of that just doesn't get spent because of deal flow. Like they're just not finding the right opportunities. A lot of startups aren't really applying themselves to these markets. They don't really assume it's available or that it's for them. And that's not true. There's a lot of different investment vehicles out there now. There's a lot more competition. So it's not kind of, VC is not the only way is the point I would say. And then the second thing I would say is that a common misconception is that particularly at an early stage, your company is worth anything other than what someone will pay for it. I have seen a lot of investors, or excuse me, a lot of founders walk away from deals like, oh, this is just way too low. This is crazy, this valuation they give me. And then they don't raise any money because where they value what they're building is up here and what the market is willing to give them for what they built is here. And they get offers here and they assume that someone's going to meet them here and then they never do. And then that's a really uncomfortable process when you have to kind of come and backtrack to try and get those deals earlier. So that would be something I'd keep in mind.
I think the other fallacy that I see is a lot of entrepreneurs are told it's just a numbers game and just go out there and, you know, just go out and hit the streets. And I don't think that's true. I think it was Jonathan that said product market fit. I think the same thing holds true for investors. Product investor fit. You need to know who your target investor is. You need to understand your product and then go after those investors and be more strategic than just a numbers game. I mean, maybe a numbers game in the beginning works so you can get your pitch refined. But I don't think it's a numbers game. I think you need to be strategic in who your investors are and target those.
I would echo. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Oh, please, David.
Well, I was going to say there was an old 80s saying years ago that ignorance is bliss. Not the case with when you're trying to raise money. But even before you get to that stage, it's been my experience that if you can not get the money early on and see if there's an actual business opportunity out there, that's probably the more ideal route that I've at least tried to follow and counsel. I think most people, when they start off, are fairly ignorant in terms of what they really need to be doing in terms of even starting a company, let alone going out and getting funding. And so if you really want to be able to check what your valuation is and what the value is, see if you can sell it first. And if you've got some early stage customers, that's a good sign that there's a value there that others might see as well.
Yep, love what David just said there. What I was going to bring up is a common belief I've seen is that venture investors are just looking for a good idea. That's absolutely not true. Ideas are really, really cheap. It's all about execution. I don't really care what your idea is. What I care is that you can show that you've demonstrated that you've got customers, that you're solving a problem, and they'll pay for it. The second thing I'll add to that is I oftentimes find people asking me, what's more important, the product or the team? If you start actually getting to the stage of institutional capital, the truth is actually really neither of them. The only thing that venture investors will invest into is a market. You obviously need to show that you have a product that fits a market need, but if there is not a sufficiently large market, The reason why that word capital has that word venture in front of it is because you're taking a substantial risk that an entire market will evolve. If you're in too small of a market, you get up the greatest product, but that all that means is that you don't, not necessarily, not that you don't have a bad business, but venture capital is not the right form of capital for you.
So I want to just add a comment, follow on to what Jonathan said is, the favorite word of venture capitalists is money. Their job is to make money. And so they don't fall in love with you or your business. They fall in love with your ability to make them money and to return money to their fund. And while that may sound cold or crass, the perspective of investors is very, very different from that of an entrepreneur. And it's not that one's right and one's wrong, they're just different.
Well, and to that point, definitely, when you're talking, to investors, don't believe everything you hear, right? I mean, they are not your friends. They are not your compadres. They're there to make money. And look, you're not there to make friends with them either, right? So, you're there to try to find a symbiotic relationship where, they're going to give you money and you're going to give them a very nice return on that investment. But when you walk out and they say, we love your idea, it's fantastic, we'll probably fund you or whatever you think you heard, don't go home and start spending the money. None of these people are going to tell you that your baby is ugly. So don't believe what you hear. Go back and if you haven't gotten offers, do your homework. Ask trusted sources. What's wrong with my deck? What's wrong with my product? What's wrong with my projections? Don't buy the happy story that comes out of the people that you're pitching to, because it's not their job to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Don, I've had some people tell my babies were ugly many a time. So just FYI.
Well, they would make for great investors, it sounds like. I'd like to move on and ask you all, in your opinion, what would you say makes a company fundable? Like, what are some of the key metrics and prerequisites that you look for when you're considering a company for investment?
So, I think you got to qualify that by the type of investor. I mean, if you're talking about friends and family, they're investing because they love you, right? If you're talking about angel investors, they invest because they love what you're doing. If you're talking about professional investors, that's a very different set of criteria. And it's a much tougher, more stringent set of criteria. And at that point, they're looking at things like, are you telling a compelling story about your company and how it can be successful? They're looking at whether they like you. Believe it or not, liking you and being likable is really important, because as the CEO, you are a proxy. You've got to go out and sell customers. And if you're not likable to the VC, you're likely not going to be likable to customers. And then it's really a question of finding the match, because there are thousands of venture capital firms, and each one has a different flavor of ice cream that they like. And if you're the, cherry vanilla ice cream with nuts in it, and they only like cherry vanilla ice cream with no nuts in it, it doesn't matter how compelling your business is, they're not going to invest in it. And that match winds up being very often luck or serendipity, or a lot of really hard work and effort and kissing a lot of frogs. And a lot of the entrepreneurs I've met have met with 50 or 100 investors before they get a term sheet.
I mean, it's probably something that's not going to, unfortunately, going to be something that early stage founders have the ability to do. But the easiest thing to do to get funding is to have revenue, right? If you can show that people are actually willing to pay for what you're selling versus showing them all kinds of nice projections, revenue and customers, that's you've shown the proof of the pudding. obviously that, the closer you can get to either one of those, revenue or even non-paying customers, but people actually using your stuff, the better.
Yeah, and I think some of the metrics that I've tried to look for along those lines is if they have any existing customers that are paying revenue, what their pipeline is looking like in terms of prospects down the road here, and what their average sales time and close time is going to be. Additionally, in that, to echo what John and Jonathan both said earlier, I like to look at who is on the team and how many times they've been through a process like this. That kind of experience goes a long way for me. And because, as was said earlier, you're going to hit a lot of potholes and challenges. It's a given. And you really want to have people that have been through that and know what to expect there. And I think that being able to have that sensibility, if you will, when things go wrong, how they are going to be able to weather that storm is going to be key and critical. So those are a couple of the attributes I tend to look at.
I want to tie into what David just said there and purposely use a word or a term that I hate from the finance industry. That's called track record. Now, what that word track record really means is a way that I can de-risk, or the way that any investor can look at an investment and de-risk what their own investment means. The most obvious one, what you just said, is with regard to the team. Do you have a track record, particularly of not having been a first-time founder, of having gone through a rodeo before, and hopefully have shown some positive results? And the reason why friends and family will invest in you, even if you have not, is because you frankly have a track record with them. You have a personal track record with them, and they're willing to take that risk on you. Absent that, don't be discouraged at all if you don't have that track record, because what I would be looking for is what can you show me that you can de-risk this relationship with, primarily through a track record with customers, that your product has a history of being sold, especially if it has some recurring revenue, and that you can show some type of a KPI in place that gives me evidence that a customer loves you, that you are solving a problem that they need. And in any way, shape, or form, you need to be able to show me something along the lines of a metric that shows that you are thinking about the business the right way and your customers recognize it.
Yeah, cool.
All right. I'd like to ask this question next. When would you say is the right time for a startup to raise funding?
That's a good one.
Before you need it. Ideally, you really don't want to get yourself in a position where you are desperate. It's like a lot of things when you're trying to find something important. You never want to come from you don't want to have that desperate energy. You don't want to, it's going to cloud your judgment. It's going to you're going to have a weird energy. You're going to put off in meetings, and you're going to be grasping too much. It's going to make the whole process harder. You should expect to spend at least 3 months fundraising. Ideally, you've done the work internally to know what your burn rate is, how much cash you have, when you're going to run out, and then you can start planning. Okay, we're going to run out at this date. Let's give ourselves 3 to 6 months, maybe plus another month for wiggle room if the market's getting weird or if there's an economic downturn, and start then. Also, I mean, it never hurts to build those relationships early, especially when you don't need the money. If there's investors that you think could be an interesting long-term fit for your next round or your first round, having a solid deck in your back pocket, being able to tell a good story, and just reaching out to connect with people and just building your network can be very effective. And it's also nice because, a lot of investors don't want to be like hard pitched all the time, but getting on someone's radar, letting them know about what you're doing, and then generating a little interest, maybe in a couple months, you reach out to them again, say, hey, Tiffany, great talking with you. Just letting you know we're moving into our fundraising now, or, however you want to frame it. That can be really effective.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jonathan was just said. But I want to also talk about what Jonathan said earlier about product market fit. I think that's really, really important when you go out and try to find funding. So Most of the startups I worked with here in Santa Cruz, they bootstrapped themselves along until they really determined what their product market fit was. And then once they did that, they could establish their total addressable market and understand scalability and actually be able to actually raise money.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, there's some gems being dropped here. That
Yes.
is for sure. One
Definitely.
thing that Mikhail said, I just wanted to echo is, the best time, to make these connections is when you are not raising and when you're not in need of it, right? Don't come off with that desperation smell. And a lot of times I found, the best way to raise is to not need to raise, right? If you're a profitable company and you're making money, that's when you'll be really attractive to investors, and you'll be in a place to say, actually, we don't need this money at this time. That's a really powerful place to be. A similar question is, it's particularly around smart money. So there's this idea in the investing world that, it's one thing to get a check from someone. It's another thing to have an investor who's very motivated and very invested in your success and will be doing things beyond just funding your company, but actually making introductions and, working with you, connecting you with mentors and supporting you in a variety of ways. So my question is, how important is smart money? And more interestingly, when is that not important?
So I want to say that to be successful, you need to have good help around you, good support in the form of mentors and advisors, and you need, particularly for fast-growing companies, you need money. And when you can get both, that's great, but the two don't always come together. And I would encourage startups to find people who are advisors. You're going to pay them in a little bit of equity. You're going to get a lot of help. You should be looking for money as well. But sometimes the two are separate. Sometimes they come together. There's no doubt that well-connected investors have at their disposal a range of people and help and contacts that can be very valuable. But you can get most of that, or perhaps all of that, through bringing aboard good advisors.
Absolutely. And I mean, to answer, part of your question, I guess the question is, when is smart money, less important? Well, when you're in the desert and you're dying of thirst, the person that has water, you don't ask their IQ. You thank them for the water. And now, if the person that brings you the water happens to be brilliant and you can then have a great conversation and learn a lot and so on, fantastic. Certainly smart money is what you want to look for, because they will bring all kinds of other relationships and ideas and attributes to the table. But look, the bottom line is, you cannot have a company with no money. So if you need to take less than smart money, you do it.
But I'm going to offer one caveat, because I worked with a lot of startups all over the world. And what I found is sometimes there is smart money, and then there is money, and then there is dumb money, right? And it's money that goes into companies at valuations that don't make sense for the company, for the entrepreneur, for the company long-term to get financing. It's terms and conditions that don't make sense. So there is dumb money. And my advice to entrepreneurs is, if you're getting a term sheet that's non-standard, if you are giving up more than 25% of your company in a round of financing, you need to really think twice as to whether that makes sense, because you will continue to need money through the life of your company. And at some point, if you don't own enough of the company, you're not going to be motivated, and smart professional money will not invest because they know that you as a founder and the founding team don't have enough skin in the game. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, where companies after a Series A round in other parts of the world, they've given away 50 or 70% of the company. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody.
From a very early stage startup position, I think most entrepreneurs need to start focusing on networking more than understanding smart money. I mean, one of the biggest issues these people have is I'm going to go to LinkedIn, I'm going to throw out a couple, invites, I'm going to send some emails. They're not even thinking about smart money yet on these early stage startups. They need to start understanding how to network, how to understand who these people are, understand, as we've said already, is what do they invest in, so they can actually get to potentially someday smart money.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
I want
think,
to tie in exactly what Andy just said there. That is especially important. I mean, for many people, especially if you're being a first-time founder and you don't know the difference between Django and JavaScript code, you're hoping that an investor will take the time to invest into you and learn you. Well, if you're not willing to put that same time into your investor, it's not going to be a match either. So the accessibility that tools like LinkedIn give you to be able to just go out and send effectively a spam email, like that is not in your advantage. I'd say the biggest turnoff that I'll see that I immediately will check a red flag is when I get a message that says, hey, we're an early stage business, raising, X. If you looked at my profile, you'll know that the reason that institution I would invest would likely be because you screwed up. And if I would invest, you're likely getting fired. I'm taking over your company. I'm not a fit for you. So it's a very good sign that if you just blanket send out a message to everybody, you are giving the signal that you're unsophisticated and not ready to raise. So be very careful about doing the homework on your investors before you go out as well.
Very good info.
Learn their investment thesis. We got our first question from the audience now. I'll go ahead and jump right into it.
Yeah.
So Pingxia said that she received verbal confirmation that she can have $1 million for funding for her startup, but can she get the money from China? I'm not 100% what that means. I'll be perfectly honest with you. All right. Ping, if you want to.
I think I know the answer to that one there.
Okay.
It sounds like she's asking, can Chinese investors invest into a U.S. Domiciled company? And the answer is usually yes. There is some additional KYC AML that she'll have, that's know your customer, anti-money laundering verifications that she might have to go through to take foreign capital. As long as there is a threshold that's in place for assuming that it's going to be a Delaware incorporated company of how much of the of your investor base can be outside the U.S. But if you're talking about a single investor that's at $1 million, I don't think they're very much concerned, as long as that investor has no concern with dealing with the actual currency arbitrage of, if something were to happen and like the RMB gets devalued dramatically, the investor could lose out significantly, and that would have no bearing upon your own business itself.
I'm a little concerned about the verbal here. We don't have enough background here, but I mean, there's got to be some paperwork here, right? I mean, you don't generally have a couple of phone conversations and somebody sends you a check. So I think definitely you want to, get some paperwork and make sure that you're, get a good lawyer. That's certainly that would be my first advice.
The other caveat which I would give is if it is technology that the government deems to be sensitive, that may be an issue. And the government and the US government has gotten cracking down on international investors. So, to Jonathan's point, for $1 million, maybe it's not an issue, but it's just something to be aware of for this financing and future financings.
Interesting. Thank you, Pink, for that question. One thing I wanted to know, since we are a Santa Cruz chapter, which is, Silicon Valley adjacent, but is not technically Silicon Valley. And a lot of the folks that are, looking to raise capital and are entrepreneurs are not based here in Silicon Valley. So I'd love to get some insights from you all as to how raising capital is different outside of Silicon Valley and what advantages and disadvantages are there to doing so.
Personally, I think COVID changed everything. The years ago, how to raise money, and now it's completely different. Like when we're going out and raising money now, having people in different states and different countries, it's much more acceptable to have these Zoom meetings and discuss things and present. It's always better to be in person. I think most, especially on the VC side, Jonathan could probably speak more to it, but they want to be within a driving distance in the past from the entrepreneur. I don't know if that's still true, but we found that just COVID in general and changing society has made investing, getting investment funds from investors around the United States has made it easier, actually.
So I think that I agree with Andy. It's made it easier, and I see investors looking more broadly for opportunities. I would say that investors in any particular area, whether it's Silicon Valley or the Pacific Northwest or the Northeast, they have different risk profiles. They have different approaches to startups. They have different philosophies around how hands-on they want to be with companies. And those differences are real. And again, it's not a question of good or bad, it's just different. If I look at and I'm going to generalize here, New York investors tend to be much more financially driven. The investors in Silicon Valley historically have been much more driven by the idea and the vision. And there's a broad range throughout the country. And so when entrepreneurs are looking for investors, certainly Silicon Valley is only one area, but I think understanding the differences and similarities between investors in different areas will help entrepreneurs better qualify and tell their story in a way that's compelling to their audience.
No, I wanted to echo what John said, especially about the East Coast investors and the differences there, having more direct experience in that regards and scars to prove it. But something that was raised earlier, and I think Mikhail could probably speak to this, ties back to the question from China. I know geographically speaking, this is much more common, but you do see this more of a trait from the East Coast schools, and it's something that is transcended in the past years as far as the other schools, of when you're going out to seek funding, there is definitely something about your school network. I'm Korean, and I can tell you that for the startups that I've been involved with out of Korea, they don't even look at any of the institutional investors. It's kind of that break between the friends and family, but they're alumni. And they could be members that they went to actual schoolmates, or the people that their schoolmates have turned them on to that may be more inclined in a particular area. Most of these schools have an incredible network for obvious reasons to be able to support the endowment. But that network has been over the years capitalized to allow for the alumni to be able to tap into as well. And being able to, as I heard one describe it, keep it in the family is really a trait that they try to follow. So don't just look at the traditional type of investors to identify the differences, if you will. There are a lot of different avenues and sources where one can tap into that you might not even think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there are a lot of those networks around big, like Berkeley has its own, on little micro ecosystem of entrepreneurship and investors. And there's people who, our whole thing is we only invest in Berkeley companies, or we only invest in Stanford companies, or We only invest in, companies coming out of Colorado or wherever. So those networks can be very powerful. I think generally though, more competition and more investors in your area is good for the founder, because there's just more competition. And little worse for the investor because people are fighting for the best deals. There's a lot of competition to get the best companies. But there are some other places where maybe they don't have quite the same network effects of Silicon Valley, but Canada has been pretty progressive in some of the legislation they've created around, if you invest in qualifying Canadian companies, we'll give you a tax credit. I think the EU has something similar. There's opportunity zones now in the US where certain economically disadvantaged areas, you can also get tax breaks for making investments in it. So those things can become very alluring, and it's all a mechanism to try and kind of diversify some of the money that's all probably a little too hyper concentrated in one area. But I think Andy said it earlier that a lot of that has also changed with COVID, and people's expectations are not what they once were in terms of, I have to meet with this person, I have to drive an hour into San Francisco to go meet them, or else they're not going to take my call. So,
Hey, Mikhail, also, one of the things that hasn't been brought up on these calls is the grant money. Is there any chance you can talk about grant funds? Because
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that is something that we spend a lot of time on at Citrus is helping startups get grant funding, particularly because if certain companies are going to be a better fit for grant funding. If you are like a direct B2C mobile app, like if you're going to be another food delivery, you're not going to find like an SBIR that's going to be a good fit for you. But if you are doing any kind of deep tech, anything really novel, there's a very good chance there's a small business innovation research grant that you can get from the government. And those are anywhere from, a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million, equity free. They're not totally free. You do have to spend a lot of time on them. They have their own compliance and regulations that you're going to be expected to put up with. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because just having to go through all those checks and balances to get into the system to qualify for a grant, you're now in a smaller pool of competition. There's also a lot of foundations that really want to invest in things that they care a lot about. You can look at, a popular one now is like the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation has been doing around vaccines for over a decade. One of the companies we worked with got money from long before COVID, because they had some very innovative technology that was going to be super important for the cold chain and for delivering vaccines. It was a perfect fit for the Gates Foundation. They were able to get that money. So grants are another one, be it like private philanthropy, impact investing, and government grants. There's a lot of different options out there. So definitely do your research, find what else is out there. There's a lot.
We have
of
this
money.
Santa Cruz Community Foundation, which does grants for small businesses here, which is a pretty good organization that's been around for a long time.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just one last thing I'll say, and I know a lot of companies that have even bootstrapped. I didn't mention this, but just winning pitch competitions and these different startup challenges where it's not a ton, but some of these you'll get 5K, 10K, 20K, some up to even 6 figures, and that's just for showing up and having a good pitch. And this is something you need to develop as a founder anyway, which is why a lot of these programs like Founders Institute will spend time making sure that you have a good presentation, because that's something you're going to be doing so much in your business. And a little bit of money here and there can be the difference between making payroll or not. So, keep it in mind.
So one thing I was curious about on the topic of alternate funding is, there's a lot of online fundraising platforms like AngelList and Gus and Kickstarter, Indiegogo. I'm wondering, how you would recommend founders best utilize these, and really wondering how angels and VCs look at crowdfunding, whether it's a turnoff or if it's something that is encouraged.
actually, I think just going through those systems improves the entrepreneur right off the bat. Just going through that whole questions and answers, have them build their pitch deck and their video, stuff like that, is really going to improve their pitch in general.
And helps with finance too. I remember doing a preparing for a Kickstarter campaign once and just going through and just trying to price out all the giveaway stuff. I mean, that's just an assignment in itself of, not only are we trying to raise extra capital for our business, but we're also going to be giving them something beyond what we actually sell in return. And it was really, really great exercise when I was just starting out in business.
I'd say for me, I would separate the two into angel lists and Gus being a little bit different than the crowdsourcing campaigns. Angel lists and Gus, I think are great research tools for you to get to understand your investors and determine who is the right syndicate lead or who's the right angel for me to reach out to. The crowdsourcing tools, I would separate it being a little bit different. That I think they certainly can help you become a little more diligent in your overall business plan itself. But to me, it's a major turn on if done well, and a major turn off if not done well. That's a very vague answer in place, but what I mean by that is those crowdsourcing campaigns can oftentimes, to do well, cost more than the actual capital that you bring in. And they actually tend to be much more of a marketing approach than it is, and a customer acquisition approach than it is actually for fundraising. And if done well, and you show that as part of your plan, that shows you have an understanding of marketing savviness and the market itself, especially if you're a direct-to-consumer company, I think it's actually a great turn on. If you're a B2B company that sells machine learning, edge hosting to enterprise companies, you're trying to launch on Kickstarter, that's a very immediate out of touch red flag for me.
Yeah,
Well, I would agree with Jonathan. I mean, I think a lot of the companies that are well suited for Kickstarter campaign are not well suited for venture financing. And there's a small overlap between the two. And certainly Kickstarter is a great way to get money, to get market validation, but it's generally on a consumer-oriented product or business or service. And so for a lot of the more traditional B2B kinds of businesses, it's just not a good fit. It occasionally works, more often than not, it doesn't.
I do want to piggyback off of Jonathan's comment, and it's something that we did not plan for, but was surprisingly very effective. We were trying to create an ecosystem, and consequently, the various partners that we engaged with were a number of, quite frankly, interesting startups that saw an opportunity to the platform we were supporting. And so we directed them, and they in fact self-directed onto Kickstarter. And what Kickstarter did, to echo what John just said about the marketing, we found that it helped chum the waters, if you will. And the leverage of more than one entity out there doing a Kickstarter around our respective platform really helped serve everybody. And it was, again, nothing planned. It was just an interesting vehicle to utilize, even though their primary objective was to make money or get some funding to get started. It was far more of an effective marketing tool than anything else, which was a surprise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So I have a lot of thoughts on these. So I'll try and be quick, but I would say, a little bit of background. I did some work in the past helping set up Biotech Angel Syndicate. Did a lot of work on AngelList with that, and it was, worked with a lot of companies who've raised on AngelList. I think it can be a good way to bring in some extra angels into a round if you're building an angel round, because it's a little more involved, it's a little bit bigger, but the total amount you may be able to raise may be higher. If you can get more angels together in one pot, and they can do some things to make that a little simpler for you. Granted, AngelList has to make their money too, so there's some pros and cons there. There's a lot of these different crowdfunding platforms, and when it's done right, as Jonathan and others have said, it can be a great sign if you can show that you've captured, it can be nice validation. If you have this many people willing to give you money for a thing, those are all people that, it's at least marketing. They may be your next customers. They could be your beta users. This could be the core of your community. When it's done poorly, it can be outstanding obligations that you're not able to deliver on. How many startups have you heard of in the last 18 months that have not delivered on a Kickstarter? It is horrendous, and I'm worried that it's just going to get worse. And a lot of startups just don't do it well.
Yep.
You have to plan ahead. You have to, like, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but you basically need to raise most of your money within the first 48 to 72 hours. So there's a lot of upfront marketing that you need to do before that. And I want to pull my hair out and throw it at my computer every time a founder comes. The first time they tell me about their Kickstarter is when it's already launched. I have to know about it beforehand if I'm going to help you. Furthermore, last thing I'll say on this, actually two last things. Be wary of, there's a lot of kind of Me Too plays in this market of, oh, we are the crowdfunding campaign for ag tech. We're the crowdfunding campaign for SaaS companies. We're the ag tech for medical devices. And it's, if they can really back it up, and if they can show we have created big deals, if we can show we have a good success rate, the average time to close, sure. But I think a lot of these are just, they see the money being made by these other platforms and they want a slice of it. And the easiest way to do that is to carve out a little niche for themselves that says, we're the ones doing this. And that's not necessarily bad if they can back it up. But I think generally, you're probably better off going to the biggest market that's a fit for what you do. And there's also a lot of things, interesting things happening in terms of equity crowdfunding, which isn't something we've really discussed yet, but there's direct public offerings now. Like there's the limitations of who can invest in your company is broadening, and that's very exciting. It's still early. I think there's going to be some interesting, regulation and red tape that comes with those sorts of deals, but that is another option of getting a bigger, potentially pool of money to fund your company beyond some of the other ways we discussed.
Very cool.
Interesting. Very interesting. We have a question from our one of our participants in the audience here, from Trent One. He's wondering, since a few of us mentioned, it's a good idea to raise when you're not desperate to raise. So his question is, how should a founder find the balance of taking the time and effort needed to prove the concept and show traction while not waiting to raise until you need to?
I'm going to offer my very biased opinion there. It's been 90% on the first and not on the second. And there's a little bit more nuance behind that there. If being a founder is going to be one of the hardest things you're going to have to do, you're going to go through some mental challenges. You're going to have to try and self-justify to yourself, why did I not take a job to make zero income for 12 months? If you're not prepared to go longer without income, or if your reason behind this is because I'm trying to drive to a great result, you're probably not right to be a founder. You have to really appreciate the process behind, it's going to be really hard, but I'm doing something that I really have to do. Otherwise, I can't exist as a human being. And if you need that runway to go in place, then you might have to think about perhaps doing it part-time on the side, or doing it in a couple of years when you're able to sustain it. But I'm strongly going to be biased towards that. Always spend time with your product and your customers.
And the goal always is to, figure out who your customers are and get customer buy-in and customer traction before you raise money. If you build your model, your mental model and your business model that assumes that you're going to raise money to figure out who your market is, you're going to be disappointed. You've got to build into your personal cash flow and your personal horizon that you have to build your product. Well, first you have to go out and figure out who the market is. Then you got to build your product, and then you got to take your product and figure out who really wants it and who's going to buy it from an unknown startup. And that process of validation, once you build your product, could take you 6, 12, or even 18 months. And you've got to be willing and have the ability and build that in to your plan, because otherwise you're going to run out of money and run out of patience. And at that point, it is unlikely anybody who is a professional investor is going to give you money. Friends and family may, but professional investors won't.
I love the 3 F's: friends, family, and fools, the ones who are the early investors.
I want to share to John and Michael, Ping, and Trent. I know we lost a couple of the attendees. Yeah, you have, if this is your first event, your first startup, my hats are off to you. because you've taken a big step to coming to a program and an event like this. And I agree to what Grill was saying earlier and what Pete was saying. I mean, I've been taking notes too because of some of the things that I've just heard. This is unprecedented. But I really want to echo the Jonathan's and the John comment. This is not for the faint of heart. I'm working with a startup and a very successful startup, but I can tell you every week I hear from him the same question. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? Okay, I had it so good. And what made me think that I would do this? And he has really a very good startup going on. And there's more people now. He's at that stage where there's more investors that want to give him more money than he needs. And he doesn't want to deal with that. But it is not for the faint of heart. And I was going to answer the question with, well, first, you better be able to not sleep. Second, you better be able to not sleep, because that's what this world is going to be about. And if you have any questions about that, see Pete after the event.
Can we see the bags? Yeah, it's been burning the midnight oil lately.
We'll do one more question from the audience, and then I think we'll bring this to a close. It's a question from Ping again. How do you protect yourself when you give out your business plan? And I'll take a first stab at this, basically echoing what Jonathan said, which is that, you know, ideas are worth a penny. It's really all about the execution. So anyone can go out there and do the due diligence that you did and come up with a fancy deck that has a nice total addressable market, and here's our market share, and do all kinds of, you know, crazy number crunching to show your valuation in this really beautiful curve that's growing exponentially. But at the end of the day, you're not fooling anyone. You know, people are going to say, well, what traction do you have? What's your track record? You know, how many paying customers do you have? And that is really something that no one can take from you, right? I mean, those are the things that are really part of what makes you special, your secret sauce. And it's those differentiators that I think are going to protect you from others kind of copying you and coming into market.
Very true.
Yeah, I'll echo that a little bit and offer, you know, a story. So I think, yeah, generally, I think some people feel maybe a little more need to secrecy than they need to with their companies for basically that reason. If just knowing about your idea is enough to undo your business, you don't have a very defensible business. You're going to have a hard time. Now, that's not to say you need to tell everybody everything all the time. That wouldn't be wise either. But, you know, execution and your ability to execute, your ability to be fast as a small company is going to be more important than your idea ultimately. The people you have on your team, maybe Kirill and I are working together and he's the expert in this thing we're doing. There's not many people like him that have this, you know, whatever. However, I do know some startups that did take some meetings early on with some large companies that they were looking to partner with. They said, hey, you know, we'd love to build this thing with you. And they go, yeah, this is really cool. And they take the meeting. And some investors will do this too if they have competitive investments, the not so nice ones. But then, you know, a year or two later, they unveil, oh, it's our version of this thing. Yeah. And that hits you like, you know, a kick in the chin, because now everyone's saying, well, how are you going to do this with this other big company doing this? And this particular company, and I have in mind, still ended up outperforming them because they had the speed, they had the expertise. And even though there's sometimes these big companies with all the resources and muscle can outbuild you and outcompete you, it's not easy for them either. And being able to be fast, be lean, and have your whole business focused on this instead of just the R&D unit of some other big company is still a competitive advantage. So you just, I guess, making sure you always have that competitive advantage in your business is going to make it defensible. So. Yeah, and I think that's a good place to close on this panel.
I wanted to thank all of our speakers. You've all
Thank you very
been
much.
so amazing. Thank you all so much for joining us for this kickoff event. I want to thank our participants who have joined for this panel, and for all those who are going to be listening to this recording, thank you for tuning in as well. Applications for the Santa Cruz Founder Institute chapter are now open. Pete, if you want to just throw that link in the chat there for some folks. The program is going to be a 12-week program kicking off in September. We have a lot of amazing mentors, including the 6 that are on this call. And I think we're over 70 mentors right now, which I'm so excited about. A lot of really amazing folks from the world of investing and that have really great backgrounds in a lot of deep technical areas, as well as different impact verticals and industries. So for folks who are interested in applying, please do so. Pete just threw that link in. It's that Apply Santa Cruz link. And for those who want to have some more time with these panelists, I'm going to drop this AirMeet networking link in here. And for everyone who wants to join us, we're going to be hanging out there for a little bit, continuing the conversation. There's a few more questions that I didn't get to ask that I'm really curious to know everyone's inputs on. So I'll go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. Everyone go ahead and click on that link, and we'll see you over in the AirMeets.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you at future events and in the program.
Thank you.
We will see y'all soon.